Hello students, today's lecture is on Elizabethan poetry, the first general topic, and you will be studying about Elizabethan poetry, its characteristic features and other things, the types also. Elizabethan age is also called as the age of Shakespeare because one of the most prominent poets and authors of the period was William Shakespeare. Now, what is the duration of the Elizabethan period? Elizabethan period coincides with the reign of Queen Elizabeth I in England. She ruled between 1558 and 1603, and Shakespeare's tenure is from 1564 to 1616. So this period is also called as the Age of Shakespeare. The span of Elizabethan poetry is considered to be basically the second half of the 16th century to the first quarter of the 17th century. Even if Shakespeare died in 1616, the first quarter, that is up to 1620s, we find that the characteristics of the Elizabethan age continue to persist. Elizabethan age is a golden age of English poetry because it is very fertile in case of poetic production. It is termed as a veritable nest of singing birds, as there were a variety of poets writing numerous types of poetry during this period. We find a very strong influence of Greek and Italian poetry in this period. Elizabethan age, the contribution to poetry by the Elizabethan age. In this period, we find epic poetry in the form of the Fairy Queen, which is in fact the first attempt to write epic poetry in modern English, and it is based on the Virgilian model of 12 books. Somehow, we find that it is an incomplete epic, but it still has the honor of being the first attempt to write epic poetry in English. It has only 5 complete books, and the 6th book is incomplete. Then, regarding dramatic poetry, as we have heard earlier, drama was written in verse, and so drama was included in poetry in the Elizabethan age. In dramatic poetry, very valuable and prolific contribution is done by the university wits. The university wits were 7 great poets educated and graduates from either Oxford or Cambridge universities in England. They have produced wide number of plays and poetry, and they include a number of poets from John Lilly, Green, Lodge, Marlowe, then Kidd, and so on and so forth. There were 7 in all. The contribution of William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, to tragedy as well as comedy is also very significant. These are all poetic dramas. Then we have lyric poetry. There is a great influence of Greek and Italian poetry on the lyric poetry of this period. Many lyrical forms were introduced into English in this period. We should remember that the sonnet was the most important revelation or introduction into English poetry in this period. It was borrowed from the Italian models. Elegies, odes, ballads, madrigals, airs, roundelays, these are the various other types of lyrics that existed in this particular period. Now let us see the Elizabethan lyric and its characteristic features. The revival of interest in Greek literature, introduction of lyrical types like elegy, ode, ballad, etc. Is very important in this period. As you see, mostly the upper class people, the aristocrats, they were highly educated people, university graduates, and they considered traveling over the continent as one of the important needs to be called a gentleman. And so they traveled wide and far on the continent and studied and mastered different forms of literature and tried to introduce them into English. In 1557, there was a book published called The Tottle's Miscellany, and for the first time, we find that sonnet as a form was introduced in English by Sir Thomas Watt and Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, through this Tottle's Miscellany. They were either translations from the Italian poets of Petrarch, or they were individual new creations by Surrey. So, sonnet, a 14-line poem, was first introduced into English in this period. We find that it was tempered and polished by it polished and tempered the rudeness of English literature. English literature, due to the introduction of these lyrical forms, became very polished and very gentle to the ear. Secondly, there was a great abundance of output. The abundant output in case of poetry was due to the overall situation of peace, harmony, stability, and royal patronage provided by Queen Elizabeth and the other members of the royal family, like the various earls and dukes. We find that this period was basically a very peaceful period. There were no major wars. The War of the Roses did end. The Spanish Armada did end by England being victorious. So whatever wars were fought, England was victorious, and mostly there were very few wars that took place in this period. You can remember, or you must remember, that production of literature or literary output is possible when there is peace, harmony, prosperity, so on and so forth. In this period of Elizabeth, it should be remembered that England ventured, or English navigators ventured far and wide into the world using their prowess in sea travel or sea journey. They explored new nations. It is in 1601 that the East India Company also came to India. So it was a period of expansion, of trade and commerce flourishing in England, and this led to an abundance of literary output, especially poetry. There was a romantic zeal, there was a quest for the remote, the wonderful, and the beautiful, and the spirit of adventure and freshness dominated this period. And as a result, the English navigators traveled far and wide in search of natural beauty, in search of wonderful nature, in search of adventure, in search of trade avenues, so on and so forth. We find a number of translations undertaken in this period also. Translations, especially from Greek and Latin, which were the international languages, and those who considered themselves to be gentlemen had to acquire the knowledge of Greek and Latin. It was considered important or necessary to be termed a gentleman. Even French, knowledge of French, helped in the introduction of new poetic and lyrical types into English language. There was a spirit of independence. Though we find that the English literary artists, the English literateurs, adopted various new literary forms from Latin and Greek and French literature, there was also the spirit of independence. The European models were acquired, but the spirit of independence, creativeness, and imagination still persisted, and this is amply evident in the personality and contribution of Shakespeare and other famous artists of the period. The diction, that is the language of this poetry, is light and delicate. There is a dominant pastoral element because there was no industrialization as such in that period, Basically, agriculture was the main occupation along with fishing and forestry. So, the pastoral element was very dominant in this poetry. Then we have the Renaissance fancies and the flights of imagination. Imaginative literature is a very important hallmark of the literature of this period, and therefore the Renaissance period, the Elizabethan period, is also called as the first Romantic age. And the Romantic age of the 19th century is called as the repetition or a revival of the Romantic age. Then there is a great rhythmical expression of personal and individual passion. This is also another feature of romantic poetry where personal emotions, personal feelings, individual passions are expressed through poetry. And the literators of this period did not lose any opportunity to express these feelings, passions through poetry, that is, literature, which was dominated by poetry. These are very sweet as well as melancholic in nature. If you read the poems of the Elizabethan age, the poetic note, the musical note dominates in them. They are sweet, that is, happy as well as sad notes in them. For example, if you see the elegies, they are evidently very sad in tone. The finer artistic feeling, yes, love, and that too a refined courtly love, is a very significant element of the poetry of this period. There is grace, it has its own grace and buoyancy, that is enthusiasm. There is gravity, that is seriousness in the emotions expressed in this period. There is a balance of form and expression. Though feelings are important, they are expressed in a beautiful way, and the forms and the rules of the forms, they are adopted, they are maintained equally in this poetry. Conventionality of themes. Conventional means existing for a long time, a tradition of themes. The themes that have been used in the Elizabethan poetry are not new ones, they are the same old ones, but they are treated with vitality, with enthusiasm, with perfection. The themes of love, praise of God, patriotism, war, revelry. Revelry is enjoyment, rejoicing, pastoral piping joys of country life, ditties of careless delight, blithe praise of contentment and ease. These are some of the themes of this period. If we see the major lyrical poets of this period, then you should remember that Edmund Spenser, Sir Philip Sidney, Michael Drayton, Samuel Johnson, William Shakespeare, Samuel Daniel, William Shakespeare, and Ben Jonson, these are some of the very famous names of this period, and they have carved a place of pride for themselves in the poetry of this age, which is popularly known as Elizabethan poetry. Technically, the Elizabethan age ends with the death of Queen Elizabeth I, that is in 1603. But as I said earlier, the tendencies continue till the death of William Shakespeare in 1616, and so the Elizabethan age is believed to be existing up to the first quarter of the 17th century. So it is a part of the Jacobean age, that is the age of King James I, that is from the 1603 onwards to say about 1620. This age is actually the Jacobean age or the age of King James I. But still, in the case of literary qualities, the Elizabethan tendencies continue into the Jacobean age also. John Milton is one poem whose mention needs to be made. Actually, he belongs to the Carolean age, that is the age of Charles I, which came after the age of James I. That is, after 1620, we have the Caroline age. Caroline is the adjective of Charles in French. So, it is called as the Caroline age. But though King Charles ruled England, the temperament of Milton was that of a Renaissance artist with its humanism, with its imagination, having a great part in his performance as a poet. Milton is a very peculiar literary artist because he has the qualities of the Reformation of the age of King Charles as well as those of the Elizabethan age, and hence it is very difficult to classify John Milton into Elizabethan or Caroline poet. So in this particular lecture, we have discussed the term Elizabethan poetry, the different forms of poetry that existed in this period, the characteristics of this poetry, and some major poets of this age. I hope you will relish, you will enjoy the poems prescribed of these poets in your syllabus. Thank you.